Every what-if championship run explained. What if Oregon's Dennis Dixon didn't tear his ACL late in the 2007 season? In 2007, the Oregon Ducks were flying high and rewriting what Pac-10 dominance looked like. With quarterback Dennis Dixon at the helm, Oregon was 8-1, sitting at number 2 in the BCS standings, and positioned to crash the national championship party. Dixon was in the middle of a breakout Heisman campaign, throwing for 2,136 yards and 20 touchdowns with only 4 interceptions. He was completing over 68% of his passes and had added 583 rushing yards and 9 rushing touchdowns to his stat line. In a season dominated by chaos, where no team could seem to stay undefeated, Dixon was the one constant. Then, it all fell apart in Tucson. Against Arizona on November 15th, Dixon re-injured a partially torn ACL he'd been playing on. On a non-contact play, he collapsed to the turf. Silence fell. The season had changed in one snap. Without Dixon, Oregon's offense went from elite to anemic. Freshman QBs struggled to operate Chip Kelly's fast-paced system. The Ducks lost 3 of their final 4 games: Arizona, UCLA, and rival Oregon State, finishing 9-4 and unranked. But what if Dixon had never gotten hurt? In our simulation, Oregon beats Arizona comfortably, edges out UCLA, and handles the Civil War against Oregon State. They finish 11-1 and claim the Pac-10 title. That earns them a berth in the BCS National Championship game against top-ranked Ohio State. In the title game, Dixon showcases his full dual-threat arsenal. He throws for 250 yards, rushing for 100 more, and accounts for 4 total touchdowns. Oregon wins 38-31, securing its first-ever national championship. Dixon takes home the Heisman and solidifies his place as one of college football's most dynamic players of all time. Reality gave us LSU's title and Dixon's quiet exit to the NFL after a 5th-round selection. But in this alternate history, Oregon takes the crown, and the West Coast becomes a new power center in college football. What if Ohio State's Braxton Miller was healthy for the 2014 season? In the lead-up to the 2014 season, Ohio State looked locked and loaded. They had Urban Meyer on the sideline and Braxton Miller under center, arguably the most dangerous dual-threat quarterback in college football. Over the previous 2 years, Miller had racked up over 4,000 passing yards and 2,000 rushing yards, with a combined 59 touchdowns. He was a 2-time Big Ten Offensive Player of the Year and a clear Heisman contender. But in August, just days before the season began, Miller suffered a devastating shoulder injury in practice. It was a non-contact throw that ended his year and possibly his NFL career. The Buckeyes were forced to turn to redshirt freshman J.T. Barrett. Barrett performed admirably, but the team stumbled early, most notably in a stunning home loss to unranked Virginia Tech. That loss almost derailed the season. Only a late push from third stringer Cardale Jones got Ohio State into the inaugural college football playoff. But what if Braxton Miller had never gotten hurt? In our simulation, Ohio State beats Virginia Tech convincingly and runs the table in the regular season. The Buckeyes enter the playoff undefeated and land the number 1 seed. In the semifinal, they take on Alabama. Miller, in full form, throws for 220 yards and rushes for 105, accounting for 4 total touchdowns in a 42-35 win. In the title game, it's Miller versus Marcus Mariota. With Miller's command of the read option, Ohio State controls the tempo and grinds out a 38-28 win. Miller wins the game MVP, and his draft stock soars into the first round. Ironically, the Buckeyes still ended up winning the national championship in real life. But in this alternate timeline, it's Braxton Miller leading the charge, not watching from the sideline. A dynasty begins with its original architect. What if Kansas State's Collin Klein didn't suffer from a mid-season injury and illness in 2012? In 2012, Kansas State was on an improbable run. Led by senior quarterback Collin Klein, the Wildcats rose to number 1 in the BCS standings with a 10-0 record. Klein was a throwback player, a punishing runner with a high football IQ. That season, he threw for 2,641 yards and 16 touchdowns, while rushing for 920 yards and 23 more scores. Bill Snyder's methodical system was working to perfection. Then came the Baylor game. Klein, reportedly battling a wrist injury and flu-like symptoms, looked out of sync from the first snap. He threw 3 interceptions, and the Wildcats got steamrolled 52-24 in Waco. Their dream season collapsed overnight. But what if Klein had been fully healthy? In our simulation, Kansas City survives Baylor 35-24. They go on to defeat Texas in the finale, finishing 12-0. That puts them in the BCS National Championship game against Alabama instead of Notre Dame. In the title game, Klein rushes for 2 touchdowns and throws for another. His control of the offense keeps Alabama's defense on the field. Kansas State edges out the Tide in a stunning 28-24 upset. Klein is named the game's MVP, and Bill Snyder finally wins his elusive national title. Klein still finished 3rd in Heisman voting that year, but in this reality, he ends the season a champion and a Kansas State legend forever. What if Ryan Broyles of Oklahoma didn't tear his ACL in 2011? In 2011, the Oklahoma Sooners were eyeing a national title, and Ryan Broyles was a big reason why. The senior wide receiver was rewriting the NCAA record book, becoming the all-time leader in career receptions. Through just 9 games, Broyles had 1,157 yards and 10 touchdowns on 83 catches. He was Landry Jones' security blanket and the heart of the Sooners' high-powered passing attack. Then came a routine play against Texas A&M that changed everything. Broyles planted awkwardly after a catch and tore his ACL. His season, and Oklahoma's national title hopes, were over. Without Broyles, Landry Jones' numbers dipped. The Sooners lost to Baylor and Oklahoma State, finishing the year 10-3 and outside of the BCS picture. But what if Broyles had stayed healthy? In our simulation, Broyles plays the final 4 games and continues his dominance. Against Baylor, he hauls in 11 catches for 170 yards and a game-winning touchdown. In Bedlam, he torches Oklahoma State's secondary for another 100 yards. The Sooners win both games, go 12-1, and secure a spot in the BCS title game against LSU. In the championship, Broyles catches 9 passes for 122 yards and a score, and Oklahoma's offense outpaces LSU in a 27-24 thriller. Broyles cements his status as a first-round NFL draft pick, and Bob Stoops wins his 2nd national title. In real life, Broyles went in the 2nd round to the Lions, and his career was cut short. But in this timeline, he finishes a champion and helps Oklahoma reclaim its spot atop college football. What if Texas' Colt McCoy wasn't injured at the beginning of the 2009 BCS title game? In 2009, Texas Longhorn fans believed destiny had returned. Quarterback Colt McCoy was coming off a near Heisman season and led Texas to a 13-0 record entering the BCS National Championship game against Alabama. McCoy, the winningest QB in NCAA history at the time, had thrown for 3,512 yards, 27 touchdowns, and rushed for 348 more yards with 3 rushing scores. He was the heart and soul of the program. Then, on the 5th offensive play of the national championship game, disaster struck. McCoy took a hit to his throwing shoulder and never returned. The offense was handed over to true freshman Garrett Gilbert, who, despite flashes of talent, wasn't ready for Nick Saban's defense. Alabama built a commanding lead and weathered a late comeback attempt, winning 37-21. But what if McCoy never got hurt? In our simulation, McCoy stays in the game and the Longhorns go toe-to-toe with Alabama. His experience allows Texas to pick apart the Tide's young secondary. McCoy throws for 280 yards and 2 touchdowns, adding another on the ground. Texas edges out Alabama in a thriller, 31-27. McCoy walks off a champion and likely vaults into the first round of the NFL Draft. Mack Brown wins his 2nd national title and Alabama's dynasty is delayed by a year. Instead of being remembered for what could have been, Colt McCoy leaves college football as a national champion. One hit changed everything. What if Florida State's Jordan Travis had stayed healthy through their Week 12 game in 2023? The 2023 Florida State Seminoles were a team on a mission. Led by senior quarterback Jordan Travis, FSU was 11-0 and one of the most balanced teams in the country. Travis had touchdowns on the ground. The the Noles were ranked in the top 4 and barreling toward the college football playoff berth. Then, tragedy struck in Week 12. Against North Alabama, Travis suffered a gruesome leg injury. His ankle folded awkwardly on a tackle, ending his season. Though Florida State went on to win the ACC championship with backups, the playoff committee controversially excluded them, making them the first undefeated Power 5 champion left out of the playoff. And in the Orange Bowl against Georgia, without Travis and multiple opt-outs, the Seminoles were annihilated 63-3. But what if Travis stayed healthy? In our simulation, FSU finishes the regular season 13-0 with a dominant win over Louisville in the ACC title game. Travis throws for 275 yards and 3 touchdowns in the championship. They make the playoff as the number 3 seed. In the semifinal, FSU faces Michigan. Travis shines, throwing for 280 and rushing for 70 more in a 28-21 upset. The title game pits the Noles against Washington. Travis outduels Michael Penix Jr. in a 34-30 thriller. Florida State claims its first national title since 2013. Jordan Travis becomes a legendary figure in Tallahassee. Instead of controversy and heartbreak, 2023 becomes the year of the comeback kings. What if TCU's Trevon Boykin and Josh Doctson had stayed healthy in the 2015 season? In 2015, TCU was a scoring machine. The offense, powered by quarterback Trevon Boykin and wide receiver Josh Doctson, averaged over 42 points per game. Boykin threw for 3,574 yards and 31 touchdowns, while rushing for 612 and another 9 scores. Doctson had 1,327 receiving yards and 14 touchdowns before a wrist injury ended his season. At one point, TCU was 8-0 and ranked in the top 3. But in November, both stars went down. Boykin suffered an ankle injury and the Frogs lost 2 of their final 4 games. They missed the Big 12 title and fell short of the playoff. But what if both stayed healthy? In our simulation, TCU finishes 12-0, defeating Oklahoma and Baylor late in the season. Boykin has a Heisman-worthy game against OU, throwing for 310 yards and 4 total TDs. The Frogs secure the Big 12 title and a playoff berth as the number 4 seed. They face number 1 Clemson in the semifinal. In a shootout, Boykin accounts for 400 yards and leads a 41-38 upset. The title game is a David versus Goliath affair, with newcomer TCU facing perennial powerhouse Alabama. The Frogs go punch for punch, and a late Doctson TD seals a 35-31 national championship. Instead of another Big 12 snub, 2015 becomes TCU's crowning moment, and Boykin-Doctson becomes one of the greatest duos to never actually win it all, but should have. What if Quintez Cephus of Wisconsin wasn't suspended in 2017? The 2017 Wisconsin Badgers were built like a throwback Big Ten champion. Dominant run game, stingy defense, and a quarterback just good enough to win. But the key missing piece? A game-breaking wide receiver. That player should have been Quintez Cephus. Cephus had 501 yards and 6 touchdowns through 9 games before being suspended due to legal allegations later proven false. Without him, the passing game lost its vertical threat. Wisconsin went 12-0 in the regular season but fell to Ohio State 27-21 in the Big Ten title game, just 6 points short of a playoff berth. But what if Cephus had played? In our simulation, Cephus catches a 55-yard touchdown in the first half versus Ohio State and hauls in another crucial third down conversion late. Wisconsin edges the Buckeyes 28-27 and finishes 13-0. They make the playoffs as the number 3 seed. In the semifinal against Oklahoma, Jonathan Taylor rushes for 145 yards while Cephus grabs 7 passes for 98 yards and a touchdown. Wisconsin wins 31-27. The national title game is a physical war with Georgia. Cephus again delivers in crunch time, and Wisconsin grinds out a 21-17 win. In real life, Cephus would return in 2019, but the 2017 season remains one of the greatest what-ifs in Badger history. With their WR1, Wisconsin might have hoisted its first national title. What if Nebraska's Ndamukong Suh had been able to get them to a win in 2009 against Texas? In 2009, Ndamukong Suh wasn't just a defensive tackle. He was a one-man demolition crew. Suh had 85 total tackles, 24 tackles for loss, 12 sacks, 10 pass deflections, and even an interception. It was one of the most dominant seasons ever by a defensive player. Nebraska's defense ranked top 5 nationally, allowing just 10.4 points per game. Suh saved his best for the Big 12 championship game against Texas. He recorded 12 tackles, 7 for loss, and 4.5 sacks. Texas was shell-shocked, but with 1 second controversially put back on the clock, the Longhorns kicked a game-winning field goal to win 13-12. That moment sent Texas to the BCS title game and sent Suh and Nebraska home. But what if Nebraska had won? In our simulation, the Huskers close out the game 12-10 after Suh pressures Colt McCoy into a rushed final throw that lands out of bounds, with no time left. Nebraska heads to the BCS title game against Alabama with a 13-1 record and the nation's best defense. In the title game, Suh disrupts Alabama's run game and pressures Greg McElroy into 2 interceptions. Nebraska wins a 17-14 slugfest, giving Bo Pelini a title and Suh the Heisman Trophy, making him the first true defensive winner since Charles Woodson. In reality, Suh finished 4th in Heisman voting, and Nebraska fell short. But in this alternate timeline, defense really does win championships. What if Deshaun Watson's greatness in 2015 had led to a Clemson championship in 2015? Deshaun Watson's 2015 season was extraordinary, yet it still wasn't enough. He threw for 4,104 yards, 35 touchdowns, and added 1,105 rushing yards with 12 more scores. Clemson went 13-0 in the regular season, and Watson was the engine of it all. Despite this, the Heisman went to Alabama running back Derrick Henry, whose workload and SEC title carried the narrative. When the two teams met in the national championship, Watson was unstoppable. 405 passing yards, 4 total TDs. But Clemson's special teams mistakes cost them in a 45-40 loss. But what if the Heisman voting had reflected Watson's total impact? What if Clemson had cleaned up just one of those breakdowns? In our simulation, Clemson's coverage unit limits Kenyon Drake's kickoff return TD. A Watson-led drive in the 4th quarter results in a go-ahead score. Clemson wins the national title 41-38, and Watson is named both Heisman and National Championship MVP. The Tigers' first title since 1981 comes a year earlier, and Watson cements his legacy even before 2016's redemption arc. Instead of being a Heisman runner-up and a national runner-up, Watson sweeps the board in this timeline, and Clemson's dynasty kicks off 1 year ahead of schedule. What if Stanford's Andrew Luck's brilliance had been rewarded in 2010, or in his return trip in 2011? In 2010, Andrew Luck led Stanford to a school record 12-1 season, throwing for 3,338 yards, 32 touchdowns, and just 8 interceptions. He added 453 rushing yards and 3 scores. The Cardinals finished number 4 in the final BCS standings, but Luck lost the Heisman to Auburn's Cam Newton, whose dominant stats were shadowed by eligibility concerns throughout the year. Stanford's only loss came to Oregon, who made the national title game. But what if Oregon had slipped up just once in Pac-10 play? What if the BCS had taken a more polished, consistent QB on a team with a defense that finished top 10 in points allowed? In our simulation, Oregon loses to Arizona late in the season. Stanford leaps into the BCS title game with Auburn. It becomes a chess match between Newton's explosiveness and Luck's precision. Luck throws for 265 yards and 2 touchdowns while directing long, clock-killing drives. Auburn's defense can't get off the field, and Stanford wins 31-27. Jim Harbaugh gets a national title before jumping to the NFL, and Andrew Luck becomes the most decorated QB in Cardinal history. After falling short in 2010, Andrew Luck returned in 2011 to win a title, but his supporting cast couldn't keep pace. He threw for 3,517 yards, 37 touchdowns, and only 10 interceptions, completing nearly 71% of his passes. Stanford started 9-0 and climbed to number 3 in the BCS. But a triple overtime thriller against Oregon, featuring a series of defensive breakdowns, ruined their perfect season. Despite finishing 11-2, the Cardinal missed out on the BCS title game. But what if they had beaten Oregon? In our simulation, Stanford finishes 12-0, wins the Pac-12 and faces LSU in the national title. Luck's decision-making and pocket poise neutralize LSU's elite secondary. He avoids turnovers, manages the tempo, and leads a game-winning drive late in the fourth. Stanford defeats LSU 24-20. Luck wins the Heisman, the national championship, and enters the draft with every box checked. Luck still became the #1 overall pick, but if either of these scenarios had played out, he walks into the NFL as a national champion. In reality, Stanford's last shot ended in a Fiesta Bowl loss to Oklahoma State, but in this alternate universe, Luck finishes the story with a trophy in hand. And now it's your turn. Drop a comment. What simulated alternate reality would you like us to dive into next? If you enjoyed watching this video, click the subscribe, and we'll see you in the next one.